This is It Matters, the show that digs beneath the surface of our political landscape, pop culture, and the 2024 election. I'm your host, Michael Starr Hopkins. I'm a born and bred Washingtonian who knows the ins and outs of DC. I've worked with political heavyweights from presidents to governors and members of Congress. I also write for and appear on The Hill, The Daily Beast, MSNBC, and News Nation. Now I'm bringing you prominent politicians and cultural icons, and the unfiltered truth. So buckle up and join me as we navigate this crazy world together and look at the situations that matter the most. This is It Matters. Let's dive in. All right, we are back with Christina Tzintzun Ramirez of Next Gen America. Thank you for coming back and joining us again. How are you?
Good. Glad to be back.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you about the youth vote and kind of where Biden can improve among young people, because it seems like right now he's running into a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, I think we recently at Next Gen, so we're the country's largest youth vote organization, we understand that young people need to be convinced about how their vote can affect the policies that they care about. What's unique about young people is that even though they vote overwhelmingly for progressives and Democrats, and even though they voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden, in 2020, he was also underwater with young voters. Mm-hmm. And so young people generally, there's a significant portion that don't see themselves as Democrats. They have less party or politician affiliation and more deeper affiliation with the progressive policies they want. So I think the Biden administration actually has a lot to lean on that they have done and delivered in response to young people's issues. Student debt cancellation, $167 billion in student debt for nearly 5 million Americans. Some of the amount that's been canceled is transformative for people. I have a friend who's 30 something years old, and ours still classifies as a young voter because we go up to 35. He worked for several years in nonprofits. He had nearly $200,000 in student debt wiped away.
Yeah.
And he told me, I voted for Joe Biden just about student debt, and I feel indebted to him because he canceled my debt. So I'm definitely voting for him again. Yeah.
Why doesn't it feel like it's resonated though with young people? When I talk to, family members and kind of like the younger brothers and sisters of friends, and they just don't feel a connection to the Biden administration. And I really do wonder why that is, because you can go through the checklist of things, but this has been a really progressive administration.
Yeah, and I mean, climate legislation as well, gun safety, starting to make some reforms on marijuana that are very popular with young people. I think a lot of times in our country, especially with young people, is we want to fall in love with the politician, right? We want to believe and put our hope in the politician. And I think for me, I've been always a little cynical. I've always put my hope less in a party or a politician and more in people and ordinary people, and what they can push for and win. And so I think when we think about reframing this election as that, and thinking about the fact, especially for young people, look, Biden was not like the progressive youth vote candidate, even though he's delivered on all of these things. Mm-hmm. It was Bernie Sanders, the other older white guy, right? What it was is that young people organize for climate action. Young people organize for student debt cancellation. Young people organize for gun safety over years, and they moved the administration. So if you like what you've won, he's clearly been a vehicle to deliver on those things. And with 4 more years, we can win a lot more. And I think it's not resonating because he was never their candidate, right, that spoke to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's our job as organizers, as advocates, as people that want to win elections because we understand what's at stake. It's our job to go out and be and understand that we are also all messengers for this upcoming election.
Do you think it's enough to talk about Trump and how bad he is? Or do you think we do have to kind of get into the nuances of policy? Because that's been a really big debate among kind of the comm side of campaigns.
Yeah, so we did our own polling and trying to really dig at those nuances and break up the youth vote to understand a lot more. And we really looked at, we know we have to persuade young people to turn out, and that it has to be on issues, but it has to be, so we know we need to focus on the youngest electorate portion of the youth vote. Because if you're 18, you were
Mhm.
10 years old when Donald Trump was first elected. Like, just absorb
That's
that.
wild.
Wild, right?
Oh my
So
God.
you don't remember probably the crazy going down the escalator and saying, "Oh,
Hmm.
they're criminals and rapists." You don't remember probably
The
the
Muslim ban.
the Muslim ban, the sounds of little babies being ripped from their mothers at the border. Maybe you don't remember the sight of Heather Heyer being run over by white supremacists in
Yeah.
Charlottesville, and then our president getting on TV and saying, well, some of these people are very fine people. And you probably don't remember him saying he liked to grab women by the pussy. Those are all
Yeah.
things that would be understandable for you not to understand. So, and then the other cohort we have to focus on are the people that aren't fans of either presidential candidate,
Yeah.
right? And that's actually a pretty big number. But when we dig into those two groups, one, the folks that don't like either candidate, in our poll, 58% of them self-identified as having voted for Biden in 2020. So we know that that is a critical group that we can make up a lot of ground with. They're more likely our people. And then the second one, obviously, are the younger folks. We actually realize we have to do both. They need to know what Biden has won, because like you said, there's a disconnect. And they also have to know the threat that Donald Trump poses. But when you do both of those things is when you see the greatest gain. I think it's there's a lot of people that think all we need to do is negative Trump messaging. But no, we also need to make sure people know how their lives have been improved and how change is happening, because they voted for change and he has delivered on a lot.
Do you think COVID changed the way that we organize and kind of the infrastructure that we have to organize? Because I think back to that 2020 election, and there was a lot of, opposition to people knocking doors. And so that was like a whole cycle of organizers that, we're still trying to train up.
Yeah, Michael, we're going deep nerd here. Okay, yes. It's true. For us as an organization, 2022 and most people that ran organizations that had a field component, 2022 was a rough year because we lost a whole cohort of people that would have come up in the 2020 election that would have gained experience as supervisors or in the field, knocking doors or being on campuses and having conversations. And then we were in a really tight labor market, right? Post as well. And so I think that everyone that I knew that did field had suffered some challenges because of that. We've started to see a real rebound in 2024 because we were able to build up in 2023 as an organization. But it did change a lot of the quality of what people wanted to produce in 2022. That being said, Democrats still crushed it in 2022. So I think that if we stay disciplined and smart, but also know this is not an easy election, that we've got to do the work, those face-to-face conversations are so critical.
Yeah, you started out as an organizer. Talk to me about what's it like being an organizer? What motivates someone to do such a thankless job? Because I think unless you're inside the bubble, I don't think the average person really understands what it means to go work on a campaign and knock doors and do all the things that really support our electoral system.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people, the story of what an organizer is, when you say it's a thankless job, it's a tough job, right? I think
Absolutely.
A lot of people think they're going to be Dolores Huerta or Cesar Chavez or MLK or something, and then they're out on a hot day with a clipboard, right?
Yeah.
Trying
in
to
the parking lot of a Walmart.
trying to get strangers to talk to you. I personally love talking to ordinary people, though. Mm-hmm. I think for me, it makes me really sharp. And I think it's the greatest experience that anybody can have is going out and talking to ordinary people, especially in this world where I grew up as an organizer before social media. Mm-hmm. So I know that you can shout something online and win a debate with more likes, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to shift an outcome as you would and that you can't just shout at people. You actually have to listen to people and meet people where they're at and understand that not everyone's a progressive evangelist or sees the world as you do. And that the most important thing to understand to move and engage people is to understand how they see the world and why they see it the way they do. I always say, I spent 10 years organizing construction workers. I would go out to job sites and have a lot of conversations. And I always say I have loved doing that work, especially in the South where I have worked, is because there was no lefty choir to preach to. There was only non-believers to convert. And
Amen.
so, I mean, this, like, to me, this is God's work, to go out and talk to people and make them believe and see that they have real power to make a difference in their lives. I think it's a lot of fun. It's challenging. It's hard work. But I think a lot of times, for especially our younger staff, what I tell them is sometimes when you're out in the grind and you're just like registering a voter or pledging them to vote, you have to take a step back and remember that you are part of this huge network, this huge operation of man, woman power, people power. It's out moving people by the millions. And that this election will be won on the margins, that those conversations you have can add up to be the difference of whether fascism or democracy wins, whether access to abortion or going back to like the 1800s for women's and gender equality happens. That is how we win, are those really hard grind jobs that don't necessarily get all the recognition or the sexy work. But if you learn how to do those jobs, you can do all kinds of jobs.
Do you feel like your experience being an organizer now gives you better perspective to not only just run an organization, but kind of get outside of that Twitter, Instagram bubble, like understand really kind of where the electorate is?
Yeah, it's always helped me to lean back on what I have learned from having real life conversations with people. People are much more complex than what they will post on a social media post. Yeah. People also, a lot of people want to be liked, or they don't want to be disliked. And so people will keep their opinions private, but that doesn't actually mean you're moving them. And so I always say, like, don't get confused about what's happening on Twitter or social media. Even with young people that are all on social media, don't necessarily think that that's indicative of where they actually are as a cohort. And I'll give an example. So when I started, my last organization was focused on mobilizing young Latinos after the 2016 election. And everybody was using the term Latinx. Yeah. And I said, it's not going to catch on. It's not going to catch on because it's a very college educated frame. And most Latinos are not college educated. It's not going to speak to them. And then you had all of these campaigns and people trying to use the terminology that they were being told that they should use. And then a few years later, you've seen people stop using it because polls have shown that 97, that's the best poll for the term Latinx, 97, and then 98% is the other poll, but 97% neither knew what the term meant or didn't use it at all or didn't like it. Yeah. 97%. So in our attempt to speak to the population, right, we were actually excluding the very population. You didn't even know you were talking to them. Yeah. So I feel like for me, I was just like, go out and have real conversations. Don't look what's online. Go out and have real conversations with real people and ask them about it. And so that's always the good temperature check, is like, are you having real life in-person conversations? And then base your decisions based off of data. And I think the biggest thing we need to do as progressives is like not be driven by our own internal viewpoint. We have to test where the population is and meet people where they're at. Like, I'm Latina. I've also been vegan for 26 years and love like hot yoga. And you can reach me talking about like environmental ecology. That's probably not the average Latina my age. Like, and that's okay.
Intersectionality.
That's okay. The average Latina probably wants to talk to you about childcare and raising the minimum wage. So go talk to her about that. So anyway, yes, it always helps me to remind me, like, if everyone in your cohort agrees with you, it doesn't mean you're winning. It means if everyone in your circle is speaking and thinking like you, it doesn't mean you're winning. It actually means you're losing because your circle's not big enough.
Do you think young people are more persuadable or less persuadable now?
I mean, I think like young people is such a huge category. I think a lot of young people are are more persuadable, right? Like if you look at even, we're talking the day after Trump got 34 counts, of which he was convicted on, all of them. And when you dig into the data,
she's smiling. There's quite the smile there.
I mean, it's nice to see justice. It's nice to see our justice system work.
Yeah, for everyone. Like,
yeah, but it doesn't always work for everyone, right? And to see it particularly doesn't work for people of wealth and white men and power.
Rich white men. who
Yes.
now have the ability to like bash the judge and continue to do things that the rest of us would get locked up for.
Yeah. And so to see him convicted by 12 people unanimously, yeah, it's nice to see that. So yeah, it puts a smile on my face. I think we're talking the day after, and we look at, if you break down by age, I'm just kind of quoting the New York Times here, but I think people over 65, just 2% said that a guilty conviction would change their viewpoint or like how they would vote, right? And then when you look at young people, how many young people were even paying attention to it was only 10%. And I don't remember the number off my tongue, but it was a lot larger than 2%. Especially for like younger Black folks, you saw double digits that said, if it were a guilty verdict, I would not vote for him at all, right? And these were people that were going to vote for him. So yeah. I think that there are a lot of young people that are persuadable, because young people are very clear that they don't like the world they're inheriting and they want to change it. This is a very educated population, but they are persuadable to turn out. And just like any other population, historically, like if you spend more money and time talking to someone, they are more likely to turn out. And historically, we have not put very much time or money into young people. So there is a lot of return on investment in this country when you invest in young people, and not just for an election cycle. Like, this is about winning the future of the country long term, which is why you have Vivek Ramaswamy and others saying like, hey, we need to, after 2022, that was a scary result for us. Yeah. Let's raise the voting age. Let's make it harder for them to vote. Let's make sure you can't vote on a college campus. All of these things to restrict the largest, most diverse generation in American history from accessing their most basic right, which is the right to vote.
Young people have been really outspoken about the conflict in Gaza and what seems to be a growing genocide. How do you think the administration is going to be able to rectify their stance with young people? Because it feels like the longer this goes on, the more it erodes support.
Yeah, I think that when we think about how much the Biden administration has delivered on student debt, climate change, gun safety, nominating the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court justice, things that are very popular with young people, where they've stood on gay marriage, abortion access. And then on this issue, they're very much out of step with the majority of the Democratic base at this point, and especially with young people. Certain polls will show you that 70% disapproval rate nearly for the administration's handling of the conflict. 35,000 people dead, tens of thousands of injured. Many young people have seen the images of the huge human cost of what's happened in Gaza. So I think, a lot of young people, and especially a lot of young people online that are very progressive and politicized, are upset, and rightfully so, as they should be. And our organization has called for a ceasefire and a release of all the hostages. We've called on the administration to listen to young people on this issue. We did see polling in 2022, and this is when the conflict in Ukraine is at the forefront, that 4% of young people at that time said that foreign policy was going to be an important issue in the upcoming election. Well, asked just a few months ago how important foreign policy was, 4% in 2022, 84% of young people said foreign policy, specifically around Gaza, was going to be an important issue. That being said, we're seeing 4% of young people say that this will be the issue that they vote on. And this will be the one issue that they vote on. So I think it's important for the administration to listen. Margins matter in this election. And we're seeing the top issues be around abortion, democracy, and the economy. And when you talk about the economy and the positions around being pro-labor, taxing the rich their fair share, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, equal pay for women's work, which are all the Biden administration's policies on the economy, these are issues that the Biden administration can win with young people.
As you talk to young people, do they realize how big of a role AI could be in displacing workers? Because I think that's something that I don't think has really been talked about a lot in this election cycle.
It's not something that I personally, or something that's come up in our work yet. I think that I think young people generally have a lot of anxiety about the future around around climate change, also around the economy. And so anything that will make, you have two camps, right? I think there's folks that believe AI could make our lives easier and better. And there's folks that, and I think I put myself in the second camp, that have a lot of questions and concerns about what AI will do, especially when we think about the release of social media without thinking through the long-term consequences, right? And we know, especially with the release of social media and the long-term impacts on people's mental health, extreme division in the country, misinformation and disinformation, the threats to democracy, on and on, that you can't just look at the benefits, you have to look at the consequences as well. And we know that policy doesn't always catch up with that. But I think young people have inherited a pretty raw deal, but economically speaking, but I think that a lot of folks understand that has been a buildup over the years. We've seen the Biden administration really move. Go back even 10 years ago, it wasn't like Democrats were talking, except, the farther left of the Democratic Party were talking about taxing the rich.
Yeah.
Their fair share. It wasn't until people's movements like Occupy Wall Street that people started talking about, we want an economy for Main Street, not Wall Street, right? We want an economy for the 99%, not the top 1%. So this is a very progressive generation as far as the economy that they want to build, because it's much harder to buy a home. There's not a lot of economic security for this generation, and they're rightfully angry about the world they're inheriting.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my mama always comments, our generation, I could not buy the house my mom lives in right now. I could not afford that. And that is supposed to be the American dream, that we're supposed to do better than our parents. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel that this generation is going to get that opportunity. What is it about the Biden administration, or what can the Biden administration do to make young voters feel more confident about their future?
I mean, I think the Biden administration has done a lot, but I think it is a huge deal to cancel $167 billion in student debt, Absolutely. Especially after the Supreme Court justices that are mostly Republican and appointed by Republicans try and tell you you're legally not allowed, and trying to figure out every maneuverable way possible. I think continuing to stand with labor unions is a huge deal, right? We're seeing the highest support of labor unions since the 1940s, 50s in this country, especially young people. 88% of young people support labor unions. 88% of people.
That's incredible.
So that's Republicans, because there are 88% of young people are not Republicans. Or all Democrats. So that includes Republicans. So I think the economic policies are really popular, and making sure to just continue to hit the villains that have created and structured this economy. As it is, we know that there are so many companies that have profited off of creating a false inflation, right, for their products, that they didn't have to raise prices, but they wanted to, right? Or they could make the can of beans 15 ounces versus 16 ounces, shrink our chips, just to make more and more off margins that were completely unnecessary, right? I think I saw
greedflation, I think is what they call it now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think continuing to make sure that people are answering to try and build an economy that understands that it shouldn't be just judged by the GDP and unemployment or how well big corporations are doing, but we should judge our economy by how well ordinary people are doing.
The courts and corporations are really intertwined, and it's becoming more apparent kind of by the day. So what role do you think corruption and the courts is going to play in the young vote? I know abortion has been something that's really been talked about, but not the courts in just a broader sense.
I think a lot of young people post-Roe really started to pay attention to the Supreme Court. It was I think you had to be a more astute political observer to be like, oh yeah, the president appoints the Supreme Court and then make decisions, they impact all of us. But if you're, what we saw in 2022, especially for young women, you take away someone's rights and take them back 50 years over the most one of the most critical decisions they can have, which is when they get to decide to make a family or over their health care, they get pretty pissed off and they start to pay attention. And so we see a lot more young people talking about the Supreme Court. You look at in Wisconsin, an off election, how many young people paid attention to the state Supreme Court. Let me tell you, that was because of abortion and seeing what a radical court, a radical extreme right-wing court could produce. And this election, I think, which will be unique, is for the first time, we're really seeing young men also being mobilized by abortion. I jokingly say, but not so jokingly say, it took them about 9 months to catch up with this issue.
I like that. You made me snort.
In 2022, it was like women were like super pissed and angry about it. It was motivated to come up for men, but not really. And then in this election, we're like, they're very motivated by it.
We're not that smart. It takes us a little while, you know.
It's a little while to be like, oh, I am now responsible. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also when you think of the court, though, I mean, this is an anti-union court, anti-labor court,
anti-environmental court.
Yeah, anti-voting court. Like, this court has literally become the new legislative court. Everything that they're not able to do in Congress, they're using the courts to do. Do you think Democrats are going to get to the point where we can start creating our judicial bench that we can curate just like Republicans do?
I think I think we just passed a pretty critical mark. I think it was like 200 and something plus judges that Biden, federal court justices that he had appointed. It was something that Democrats paid a lot more attention to, right? Seeing that a whole cohort of justices under Trump were really pushed forward. Of course, they blocked a lot of Obama being able to push forward justices and get them appointed. But it was something that Democrats have placed a real premium of focus on. I think when we get to the Supreme Court, I think there's a whole nother level of strategy that, look, Republicans, they've been appointing very, very young judges. These are lifetime appointments. So they are looking at long term. They've also created their own threshold by the ultra right about who gets to go into these positions, and looking at how loyal they will be to that right wing agenda. And I think that we have to get a lot smarter. And there's also things that, there's nothing that says there only has to be 9 Supreme Court justices. So it is something that could be expanded and looked at as well.
You live in Texas and are uniquely understand kind of the border crisis. Immigration is absolutely going to be something that Republicans continue to run on. Do you think it will cause young people to turn out opposing a lot of these draconian, inhumane efforts that they're putting forward?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at it was crazy to watch in the Republican primary, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of Republicans say my top issue is immigration. It's like Iowa's, immigrant population is pretty insignificant besides doing all of the critical jobs in farming.
Yeah.
And slaughterhouses, which save that for to talk about.
We could do 5 episodes on that.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting is young people generally immigration doesn't come up as a top issue like it does for older generations, and that's and when it does come up, it comes up a greater concern for immigrants, a greater support for immigrants, and there's I think several things that you could attribute that to. This generation is when Trump talks about, or Republicans talk about fear of immigrants, you really didn't hear them talk about fear of refugees from Ukraine.
No, it's always brown immigrants.
It's always brown and black immigrants, right? That is, and we know our racialized history in this country. And so young people, this is the most diverse generation in American history. A lot of the growth of this country, especially young people, has come from immigrants. I am a proud daughter of a Mexican immigrant. And so we understand, young people, even if they're not an immigrant themselves, they have friends whose parents are, or they're related. Yeah. Like they see the contribution, they see the hard work. They see that also, even people are different colors. They're really just people. And
we're all just good people.
Yeah. And there's good and bad people in every community, right? Like it's not that complex. Yeah. So I think where I I think that young people will be driven by that, but I think also Democrats have to respond better than they do, right? I think that they let Republicans drive the debate. The reality is we have the system we have that is totally broken and doesn't benefit American-born workers and sure doesn't benefit foreign-born workers. It only benefits big corporations and politicians that want to use immigrants as a scapegoat to distract from their failed policies. Look, I worked for 10 years with some of the hardest working people I know, undocumented construction workers, which in my state make up half of the workforce. You don't have a school, you don't have a roadway, you don't have a home in this state if you don't have undocumented workers. We don't have food to eat in this country if you don't have documented workers. You don't have meat, you don't have fruit, you don't have vegetables. We don't have a lot of child care in this country and elder care with undocumented workers. I promise you there's no undocumented worker I have ever met that said, I want to come to this country without any documentation and be for the rest of my life a second-class worker, a second-class person, and be exploited and be underpaid. They never want that. They would love if there was a system to come to this country and fulfill those jobs and have their work, hard work honored. And for American-born workers that are upset, that say this drives down wages, 100% it actually does. But the work immigrants aren't to blame for that. It's Republicans that have refused to allow immigration policy that actually would allow an orderly system to fulfill the jobs that we need filled in this country.
What does it mean that Republicans refuse to vote for a bill that they put together?
I think we've seen a stalemate since 2010 on immigration.
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, they just have not wanted to move anything forward. There's two reasons for that. One is business interests, corporate interests. And the other one is the Republican Party has a hardcore racist base and not the overall Republican Party, but in a primary, they have a hardcore xenophobic, racist, white supremacist base they've built to hold power. Yeah. And they haven't been willing to take it on. Instead, they've embraced it as part of their platform and their vision of who they are as a party.
And unleashed it. Now it just is completely unfiltered, waiting for the day after the election to just fucking go.
I don't know how you feel, but in 2016, I was pregnant. I was going to have my first baby. My son's father is a dreamer. He came to this country when he was 8 years old, valedictorian, great story of the American dream. But our president was saying that he was going to rip our family apart and that my child was an anchor baby. I woke up afraid the next day.
What is it like to be in Texas? Texas, a lot of people consider to be an incubator for what Republicans are trying to do across the country. What is it like to be in a state like Texas where you have a governor who is constantly making brown and black people or putting them under attack?
Yeah, I think Texas, I want to talk about current Texas, then I want to talk about hopeful Texas. But I think Texas serves as a warning call for the rest of the country of how dark it can get. And that when you take away people's voting rights and power, even if they make up the majority and you make it difficult for them to vote, how a minority can govern at the expense of everyone else. So Texas is the state that brought you Roe v. Wade and the right to abortion access, right? And Texas was the state that helped really take back that right and served as a laboratory of experimentation for the rest of the country on how to assault women's rights. You just had the Texas Republican Party put in their platform as a proposed item that women who have abortion care could be charged with homicide and thus in Texas, the death penalty. It's absorb that.
Death penalty.
Death penalty for making a decision over your own health care and body, right? The party that says that they want small government would go to that extreme. Texas is the state with, one of the largest foreign-born populations. 1 in 6 Texans are foreign-born. And yet we have a governor who even said he wanted to shoot migrants, shoot people,
Yeah.
refugees, asylum seekers, commit murder, that he was upset that he would do it, but he would be charged. So he won't do it, or else he would openly commit murder. That's what our governor said.
And people cheered him.
Yeah,
he didn't just say it and get booed. I mean, his poll numbers went up.
Yeah, and our economy here in Texas, just, some of the hardest working people get the least. And we're the largest carbon emitter in the country. We're one of the largest incarcerators in the country. We're the state with the highest level of people that are uninsured because they refuse to take Obamacare to prove a point that it cost 1 million people access to basic health care in our state. So that's Texas today. And what I have hope for is, like, if you change Texas, you don't just change the political outcome of our country for an election cycle, you change it for a generation. And people have a view of our state that often looks like my white grandpa, because I'm half white, half Mexican, who wore an awesome cowboy boots, awesome cowboy hat. And a lot of people think of Texas and they think him. We got awesome cowboys here in Texas, white cowboys. But our state is actually majority young, brown, and black. We are also the state that make it the hardest to vote in the country. So, and that's according to the Brennan Center. But I think demographics are not destiny. They're simply a core ingredient in the recipe for change. And so it's exciting in Texas to see more people starting to invest in our state and in the power. And ultimately, I think the power comes down to young people of color. And I do believe my state will change. And when we do, we get to align with a more progressive vision with other big economies like California that start to shift the outcome on every single issue you could possibly imagine. So if you're the largest incarcerator, if you're the largest carbon emitter, if you're the state with the highest uninsured rate, one of the greatest educators because we have such a huge student body, but you can shift all of that. Well, you can become the place that gets to experiment on all kinds of progressive policy for the rest of the country.
How does Texas keep electing a douchebag like Ted Cruz? I mean, like, Republicans don't like him, Democrats don't like him, but he keeps getting elected. Like, how does it keep happening?
So if folks don't know, Ted Cruz is up for election. And he is one of the most hated politicians, even within his own party.
It's like the only thing that can unify Democrats and Republicans, that Ted Cruz is an asshole.
John Boehner famously said he was the most hated son of a bitch. Right? Yeah. I think the other one was like, if he was on, who was the other one that said? Maybe it was Lindsey Graham. I don't remember. Don't quote me on who it was. Like, he was on fire in the Senate floor. No one would.
Yeah, no one would piss on him. Yeah, I mean, look, Trump humiliated him over and over again, talked about how ugly his wife is. And then Ted Cruz continues to get on TV and just absolutely
kiss his ass.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even know how to say anything that's not going to get me kicked out.
I think it shows that when you rig the system in your favor, when you make it really hard for people to vote, that you can hold on to power, right? Like, I think that here in Texas, I do think the days for someone like Ted Cruz will eventually come. And because, who takes off during a freeze that are keeping millions of people without electricity? We literally had, some numbers show hundreds of people freeze to death or die during that freeze. And he took off to Cancun. Like, it's hard to get much more. And then took a fake picture delivering one box of water to his staff's car. Like, is it possible to care less about the people you serve?
Is he a psychopath? Because it kind of feels like he's a psychopath.
I think a lot of elected officials are driven by power and less by purpose, right? I think that that's the reality, right? I think that our job is to elect the best possible people and then push them to do the right thing. But he is driven, I think he's one of those rare individuals that is driven completely by power and has no purpose besides power.
How do you convince young people to run for office anymore? I mean, when you think about how nasty it is, how much money you have to raise, why would a young person want to get into politics?
I mean, I think that's what is exciting is we're seeing a lot of young people run for elected office, and they are the ones that are encouraging young people to believe in government. So, I'm really proud of the work that David Hogg is doing at Leaders We Deserve, looking at state legislatures, straight legislative races mostly, and getting behind young people that have a vision for their local communities and are starting to run and win and running in open seats. And so I think there are a lot of young people that are very brave. And even with all the bullshit in politics, even with all the seemingly often careers that require you to climb your way up.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the only thing that's going to change it is young people that are impatient and courageous. And we're seeing a lot of young people that are impatient and courageous step up. Congressman Maxwell Frost, my good friend, Congressman,
absolutely,
like many others. So it's never just one individual. It's going to be a movement. And I think we're seeing the birth of that movement of young people run to lead their own government and their own country.
Yeah, I mean, you can't wait for an invitation. You got to go and just kick the door down because nobody, especially politics, which is such a white inside inside the beltway kind of baseball game where if you don't know the right people, often you can't get access to the game. So, yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. As we wrap up, what do you tell young voters who are thinking about either not voting or voting third party or just kind of writing in a random person because they're so frustrated?
I mean, I think people need to, for me, I, again, put my hope in ordinary people, right? And I try and elect the person that I think I can push most and that most aligns with my values. I never expect 100% alignment, right? Like I always say that I love my mother, but we don't agree on everything and that's okay, right? But generally speaking, does the candidate most align with me? When I think about where most young people are on gay marriage and LGBTQ rights, the Biden administration delivers on that. When I think about where the Biden administration is on economic justice, about labor unions taxing the rich their fair share, building an economy that's for the working and middle class, yes, he's the first president to go onto a picket line with one of the dopest unions there is, the United Auto Workers, right?
Amen.
He is on the right side of climate change, on the right side of abortion access, on the right side of marijuana and working towards better criminal justice reform. But that happened because young people voted, right? So if you want more of that, if you don't believe you got enough, then you absolutely have to go vote to get more, right? I think you shouldn't be satisfied. No way, I'm never satisfied, which is the point. We can always ask our government to do more, and well, we should. But young people make up the largest, the most diverse generational voting bloc in American history. They got the Biden-Harris administration to do all that they have because they turned out in record numbers. So go vote, go win even more, and push, and vote for yourself, vote for the vision of your country and the candidate that can most deliver that for you. But if you vote third party, it'll probably be difficult to get that to happen because no one's going to win in third party. And we definitely know Trump is not delivering on any of that.
Amen to that. And just last question, I promise. You talked about having a son in 2016. How do you talk to him about the election and the state of the country right now? And what do you tell him about his future and what the country could look like?
Yeah, so I do talk about it with my son, and I took him out last election to go give high fives to people. He was giving high fives to people at campus if they had voted. Free high five. It was very adorable.
I follow you on Instagram, and the videos are amazingly cute. Everybody should go watch them.
Yeah, the guy's the cutest, but I'm biased. But, I do talk to my son about it. I remember being 6 years old when Ronald Reagan and Dukakis were up, and I remember my dad talking to me about it, and I didn't fully understand, but I knew I was opposed to Ronald Reagan, right? That still sits with me. I remember having an argument with another 6-year-old. It was for Reagan, and neither of us really knew. But my son, I think he's smarter than me, and so we talked about climate. He really cares about the environment and climate change and immigrants, right? So we talked about why they're different and in a 7-year-old's vision of the world.
Yeah.
Luckily, you don't have to be that nuanced with Trump and just say he told all the big oil and gas companies they could give him $1 billion and he'd set our planet on fire.
Yeah. Simple as that.
Simple as that. And so yesterday I told Santi that my son's name is Santi, that Donald Trump was convicted And he said, we should just start calling him Dumb Trump.
Oh my God. See?
So I was like, Sandy, we got to put you on the messaging team.
Right? Can we send him over to the DNC or maybe to Biden world?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good.
That is pretty good.
He's been saying that since yesterday. He said it today this morning because I was listening to the radio. He said, is that Dumb Trump again? I said, it is.
I think we've got our next press secretary for the White House.
Bingo.
Christina, it's always great having you. I always appreciate getting your input. And where can people go find Next Gen, and how can they get active in this election?
So we need tons of volunteers this election. You can volunteer from your home or in person, depending if you're in one of our 8 key battleground states. Go to nextgenamerica.org. And you can find there all the information to volunteer, sign up, or get reminded to vote. We are going to be on 130 campuses, sending 25 million calls and texts to millions of young people, organizing on dating gaps, organizing on Discord and Twitch, you name it. Or if you're like, and realize we're all influencers, right? Like some people are, get plugged in with our team as well. So there's a million ways, or not a million ways, but there are millions of contacts, millions of people in contact with Next Gen, a lot of ways to get engaged. So please volunteer and post it on social media so other people volunteer as well.
There you go. Go join, go volunteer, go vote, go get your friends registered, go do all those things, because participating in the process is vital. Christina, thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good weekend. Bye.
You too. Thanks for being with me today. Share this episode with others, like and review it, and please keep learning all you can so that you can make an informed voting decision this year. Come back next week for more Truth in Politics. I'm Michael Starr Hopkins, and this is It Matters.